What's up everyone? For today's video, we're going to be talking about the all-new Nikon Z6 Mark II.
Big dog status, I'm a big dog vet. I pull up on the block in a big Corvette. Yeah. Ride around the city with a stick all black. Try with a scope, we with all that.
The Nikon Z6 Mark II is definitely an upgrade from our original Z6. We're going to get the same 24.5 megapixel backlit sensor. We are going to get dual X-Speed 6 processors, so this thing is plenty fast. And what those X-Speed processors are really going to help with, aside from autofocusing, is it's going to help when we're trying to do higher frames per second. So mentioning that, we're going from 12 frames per second to 14 on the Z6 Mark II. And then we're also able to shoot without blacking out on the back LCD screen or in the viewfinder. So if you're really trying to do fast action, moving subjects, then it's nice to know that we're able to shoot raw photos without having it black out very soon. And that's going to give us a total of 124 shots before you start seeing it. Another thing to note on the Z6 Mark II is we're going to have dual card slots. So we're going to get an XQD card slot as well as an SD UHS-2 card slot. Now, this may seem like a really small thing to some, but I feel like this is a big feature that Nikon incorporated into the second version of the Z6, because when the Z6 originally came out, I thought personally it was a phenomenal camera and it had really great features to it, and a lot of other people did as well. But one of the biggest things that it didn't offer was the dual card slots. So if you're a professional shooter, an event shooter, something of that sort, it's nice to have the redundancy. So if that small % chance that something did happen and your card failed, you had the backup. So a lot of people weren't actually able to use the original Z6 as a primary professional camera. So it's really nice to see that Nikon listened and they threw us that extra card slot in there. Now, I did mention earlier about the dual X-Speed 6 processors, making it a lot faster. And one thing that it does improve on is the autofocus. Now, I'm not gonna do too much of a test side by side compared to the original Z6, but they're very similar. But when you are using the Z6 Mark II, when a subject really turns their head or something of that sort, it's gonna actually start tracking the head as well. So on the original Z6, if I was filming someone with eye autofocus and then suddenly they turned around or something like that, not 100% of the time it would land on them. It would, maybe track to something else that was in the frame, but this definitely improved on that. And another great feature that this offers, since we do have those dual processors, is that we are getting an animal eye autofocus. So for you nature photographers out there, that is something you can set in the camera. Another feature that we have, and previous videos I always refer to shooting wedding videos just because that's what I'm really familiar with, is we're able to get the wide selection autofocus, but get the face detection inside of that. And I might have said that off and kind of weird, but basically we can set our wide box and whatever is in that frame, we can have it set to face detection. So what's really nice about this is if I'm, for instance, walking backwards down the aisle and I'm trying to focus on the bride, well, in other cameras, everyone's facing the bride as well. So if that pops up in my frame, it might want to jump to different autofocusing points. If I see someone really in the frame on the left side. So it's real nice to where if I just have that box and I center it and I'm backing up, as long as I'm focused on the bride, it's going to hit that 100% of the time. So the autofocus in this system is very reliable. Another feature that we improved on is we're going to get a maximum shutter speed of 900 seconds. So if you're trying to do long exposures, this camera is going to be perfect for that. I think that's 15 minutes, 15 times 60, I think that's 900. If I'm correct, we're going to put it on the screen. But this thing can do 900 seconds long exposure. So if you're going to be doing, let's say, astrophotography or something of that sort, that's really going to help out with that as well. The Nikon Z6 version 2 also has multiple exposure mode. We are also going to get focus shifting. So what it's going to do is it's going to take multiple photos and just shift the focal plane. So if I'm doing, let's say, something like macro photography, I'm able to get different focusing spots stacked in my image. Now this is going to be that, it's not mandatory, but it is optimal if you are using this on a tripod so your image is not moving, and then you can use third-party software to stack your image and you're just going to get beautiful, sharp, and focus images all across your photo. Another feature we have is we're going to have 20 creative looks inside the camera as well. Now, if this is something that you're into, I don't even see it half and half. I see this mainly like 80-20. A lot of people who are picking this photo up are not buying this to do the creative looks, but it is nice to see that the camera does offer that inside of it in case you want to do just get a certain look before you have to do any editing, and you can actually dive deeper into those creative looks and actually adjust it to your liking. Now that brings me to our next topic, video. So I do want to talk about some of the video specs as well. So we are going to be able to shoot up to 120 frames per second in 1080. We're going to be able to get 4K 60. Now that is going to give you a DX crop. And then we are able to shoot full frame readout at 24 frames per second. Now this is only going to be an 8-bit internal camera. We're going to talk about that later, so I'm just going to get through the specs, but we do have 8-bit internal. If we are recording externally, we can do HDR, we can get in-log, and we are able to get 10-bit recording. This camera can also send out a 12-bit signal to an external recorder as well with a paid upgrade. So we just got finished shooting with the Nikon Z6 version 2, and we tested out some of the features. We tested out the autofocusing, which I thought did really well. Now, there was one instance where I was filming at 120 frames per second and I was backlit by the sun, and whenever I did get up and turn around, it tracked my body up until the point to where I turned back around and sat down. It actually focused on the tree to my right. So that's something that you just want to keep in mind. I was having a little issue with the backlit stuff, but other than that, I really didn't see too much of an issue with autofocus. I still think it's very, very solid and really, really reliable. We set it up and we were actually able to do interval shooting. Now, me personally, I don't do very much interval shooting. I know in certain cameras, you have to basically do the math yourself of how fast you want, or how many seconds you want, how many shots that you want it to take every certain amount of seconds. It was very, very easy to do it inside the camera. It gave you step by step. I said I wanted to do 5 shots every 25 seconds for 5 minutes, and it did it no issue. So that was something I was really impressed to see. I love the dual card slots in here. And some of the stuff I didn't talk about is the ports that we have on here. So we have a mic jack and a headphone jack. So for the videographers, you're gonna really appreciate that as well as a mini HDMI port, USB-C, and a shutter release button. Now the USB-C with this new ENEL15C battery, we're actually able to power this indefinitely if we have enough supplied power to the camera itself via USB-C. So for streaming, that'd be something really great. Now, like I mentioned, these have a lot of great additions to this camera, but I do want to compare it to the Nikon Z6 to start off with. There were some things that there's some things that I didn't like about this camera that I felt like just weren't the right moves by Nikon, in my personal opinion. So 8-bit internal, I think that is a really big setback for a lot of people looking for this camera. The Z6 original I thought was a brilliant video camera. Having 8-bit internal is honestly, in my opinion, just not something Nikon should have done. A lot of cameras coming out nowadays are able to shoot that 10-bit video, and I do not see why Nikon was not able to do that in the Z6 version 2. So like I said, external recording is not always a great option, especially if you want to travel light. Another thing that I also wanted to touch on was our dual card slots. We do get an XQD and an SD card. Now I mentioned earlier, the 2 processors is probably going to require this XQD card slot. That's why they kept it in there. But I like having the same media personally, and this is just a personal preference. I would have liked to just have dual SD UHS 2 card slots in there and still be able to shoot the high frames per second with the no blackout up to 124 frames. Another thing for the video is that when we are shooting 60 frames per second in 4K, we are going to get a DX crop. Now that's a Nikon reference. Roughly it's around 1.5 crop. It's APS-C size sensor. Some cameras are not doing this. Now the A7S III by Sony, that's getting 4K 60 with the full sensor readout. And if you want to call that mainly a video camera and this more of a hybrid, then I understand that, because our S1H Panasonic also gives us that crop. But for the Z6, I would have liked to just see the 4K 60 with the full frame. And one other feature that I do want to talk about, in the world of, us being in 2020, everybody and their mamas are vlogging. I don't know why Nikon didn't keep the same screen design that we had on the Z50 and the Z5 to where it flips all the way down. So we have the option to do vlogging, even if that's something we're not into. kind of a bummer that they didn't add that in there as well. Now, these are just some things that personally I didn't like myself. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, what you would have liked to see out of this camera, or if you're overall pleased with the upgrade from the version 2 to the version 1. Other than that, remember to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on our next video.
That's my paper, don't you bottom mine.